family and friends.
All right, here to discuss is Peter Schweizer himself, the brand new book, The Government Accountability of the, by the way, he's president of the Government Accountability Institute, and this book looks explosive. We just got it a short time ago, so we're reading some of the summaries, but it doesn't just go after Democrats.
That's right. We go after both sides because we follow the evidence. The book is coming out today. We're already #3 on all of Amazon, so I think that people are very interested and concerned about corruption in Washington, D.C. If you look at the Obama administration, people, I think, are going to be shocked what the Biden family was involved in and what associates and in some cases family members of Secretary of State John Kerry were involved in. Major deals involving the Chinese government, not Chinese private companies, the Chinese government.
Senator Mitch McConnell, Elaine Chao, too, right?
Yes, that's right. Senator Mitch McConnell as well. Again, big deals with the Chinese government that have made these families
give us an example,
wealthy.
something shocking.
Well, so in December of 2013, Vice President Biden flies to Beijing. With him on the plane is his son, Hunter Biden. Very sensitive issues, the South China Sea. The Chinese are expanding their power base, trade issues, economic conflict, etc. Joe Biden is criticized on that trip for basically going soft on Beijing. 10 days after they leave, Hunter Biden, his son, scores a $1.5 billion, with a B, billion-dollar private equity deal from the Chinese government.
Sure, because there are restrictions on what government officials can do and accept, but not for their family.
That's exactly right, and that's a key part of this book.
Is that breaking the law?
Well, you know, the question is whether there's a quid pro quo, and we don't know. But here's the problem. That deal was never disclosed. We uncovered and found it, and this is the problem. If Joe Biden gets a $1,500 campaign contribution or a $1,500 gift, or his wife does, it has to be disclosed. But if your kids or if a sibling or a parent scores $1.5 billion from a foreign government, they're not required to disclose it. That's got to change.
What about the Ukraine and Hunter Biden?
The Ukraine's another great example. Same thing. Hunter Biden, while his father is the point man for the Obama administration on policy towards Ukraine, becomes business partners with the most notorious oligarch in the Ukraine, a guy named Igor Kolomoisky. This guy is out of a James Bond film. And essentially what happens is he goes into business with Kolomoisky. Kolomoisky's bank, Privat Bank, is the bank through which U.S. and IMF aid dollars flow. $1.8 billion goes through this guy's bank, and $1 billion disappears. This is Hunter Biden's business partner.
Incredible.
What about the Kerry family?
Well, in the case of the Kerry family, you've got basically 3 Chinese deals that are done during this period. 2 of them, Chris Hines is front and center in. One of them involves an offshore account they've set up called Rosemont Seneca Technology Partners. The Chinese government puts in $38 million. In the other case, you've got Rosemont Realty, which is a real estate company he's involved in, a Chinese company that is linked to the Chinese Navy. Buys into this company and promises $3 billion to expand real estate purchases.
Once again, because it's the family, not the politician.
That's correct. There's no disclosure. We don't know about it, and that's got to change. There's got to be legislation that says if your family members are doing deals with foreign governments, the American people need to know about it.
Chris Hines is his stepson?
Yes, Chris Hines is his stepson. That's right.
And regarding Mitch McConnell?
And so in case of Mitch McConnell, Elaine Chao, his wife, her family is in the shipping business. If you look and dissect their shipping business, you find that they are basically completely dependent on the good graces of the Chinese government. And in this case, Elaine Chao's father gave a gift of $5 to $25 million to Mitch McConnell. So they are direct beneficiaries.
Wait, say that again?
A gift of between $5 and $25 million that Elaine Chao's father gives to Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell.
How's that legal?
That is something, that is something that they do and gets disclosed. But what people don't realize is, where did that money come from? It came from Chinese government, specifically the China State Shipbuilding Corporation, who is the business partner with the Chaos, is the largest military contractor in China.
So if, for example, the president wants to put tariffs on China and there's bipartisan uproar about those tariffs, you wonder what their perspective is.
Brian, that's a great point. And one of the things that I argue in the book is that if you look at Mitch McConnell's record in the Senate, he has become increasingly soft on China as it relates to military issues or trade issues. He's probably going to say, no, that's not true, it's not connected. But the pattern is overwhelming, and it's about follow the money. This is where we always end up when we look at corruption in politics, follow the money.
Holy cow. All right, brand new book out this week, Secret Empires. Peter, thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Peter.
Great to be here.
All right.
right, he's back 3 years ago, about this time of year. New York Times bestselling author Peter Schweizer. He launched the book, #1 New York Times bestseller, Clinton Cash. He's out with a new investigative book. It's entitled Secret Empires, How the American Political Class Hides Corruption, Enriches Family and Friends. All right, let me just tell this audience, because I've read the book, and you saw I had it highlighted today, that we're not going to get to the whole thing today. I want to give a broader overview, and we'll do what we did last time. We're going to break it down one by one. You were the first guy to break Uranium One. You talk about profit through proxy. You talk about Biden. You talk about Kerry. You talk about Obama. You talk about Republicans, Mitch McConnell.
Right. That's exactly right. This is the new corruption, Sean, and this is not the corruption of, $90,000 in your freezer. This is major amounts of money.
Billions.
Yeah, billions of dollars in some cases, and it involves foreign governments who want to influence our leaders. And the way they get around disclosures, the way they get around the law is they don't give the money to the politician. They don't even give it to their spouse. They give it to their kids or they give it to a sibling. And that's a way that it avoids detection. The amounts of money are massive. So, for example, there are 3 major deals involving the Chinese government and family members, close aides of the Secretary of State, John Kerry, and the Vice President.
His adopted son, Joe Biden's son.
And Joe Biden's son. And basically what happens is in 2013, Joe Biden flies to China to talk to them about very sensitive issues, the South China Sea, talking about trade issues, economic issues. Hunter Biden, his son, is with him on Air Force Two. Okay, that's fine. That's great. Here's the problem. 10 days after they come back, after Joe Biden takes a pretty soft position towards the Chinese, Hunter Biden inks what becomes a $1.5 billion with a B dollar deal.
So he takes his son to China.
Yeah.
He was told at the time, if I remember, that he was being soft on China.
Right, exactly.
10 days later,
yes,
his son got a what?
$1.5 billion private equity deal. That's the first of 3 deals.
$1.5 billion with a B.
That's right. Billion with a B. And that's the first of 3 deals, Sean. There's another deal. This is one that involves Kerry's family. It involves one of Kerry's aides and Hunter Biden. It's Rosemont Seneca Technology Partners. It's an offshore fund. Chinese government puts $38 million into that. Third deal, Rosemont Realty, again, involving these 3 same individuals. It's a Chinese government buys this real estate company, puts in $3 billion.
How many billions between these 3 are we talking about?
You're talking about, if you accumulate all of them, you're talking about multiple billions of dollars, at least a couple of $1 billion. And here's the problem, Sean. None of this was disclosed. We have pictures of it. We have the documents. But it wasn't disclosed because federal law doesn't require the Vice President of the United States.
So it's a backdoor way. Like Obama made a big deal. Oh, 5-year lobbying ban.
Right.
My what. That's a lie.
Yeah.
Because if Biden's son can go on Air Force Two and make a deal 10 days later for $1.5 billion, and this is the first of a number of deals.
Yes.
This is basically another way to buy influence.
That's exactly right. And that's why it's key. We've got to change the law. There's got to be disclosure. Right now, Joe Biden gets a $1,500 campaign contribution, Sean. He has to disclose it. His son gets $1.5 billion private equity deal from a foreign government. Yeah. No disclosure.
All right. We're going to bring you back once a week and dig into each one of these scandals one by one. But this is a big headline for our audience and includes Mitch McConnell.
Right. Right. You've got Mitch McConnell, his wife Elaine Chao, very closely tied commercially to the Chinese government. China's State Shipbuilding Corporation, largest military contractor in China. You've got close commercial ties there. And McConnell, Senator McConnell, and Elaine Chao got a gift from her father from between $5 and $25 million. That is a result of that Chinese government money.
And we're also going to bring you back on Obama. His deals are a little different and a little shady, too. All right. So you have on the cover of the book, you have Kerry, you have Crazy Uncle Joe, you've got McConnell, Obama, and Jared Kushner. And I read the Jared Kushner part, and I'm thinking, oh, boy, he's in trouble. But it was a lot different. This isn't the same. Why did you put him on the cover if he's not guilty of these same issues?
Sean, we deep scrub everybody. Republicans, Democrats, we've always done that.
McConnell should be nervous about this book.
Yeah, I think he should be very nervous about this book. In the case of Jared Kushner, look, there's no deals that have been consummated. We didn't find any foreign deals. What we did find, though, is the Chinese government has said They don't like President Trump's policies on the military. They don't like his policies on trade. And they explicitly said the way we're going to try to soften his position is by going through the kids. So we really are, it's a warning saying, so don't take these deals.
Others did corrupt deals. You're just saying in Jared's case, you better learn from these guys. Don't do it.
That's right. Don't do it. It's going to be damaging to the family. It's going to be damaging to the country.
All right. This book, Secret Empires, bestseller, Amazon.com, Hannity.com, bookstores everywhere.
In 2013 and 2014, China embarked on an aggressive air and island campaign to dominate the South China Sea, much to the dismay of Japan and other countries in the region. When Vice President Joe Biden visited the country in 2013, he emphasized trade between the U.S. and China and did not focus on the South China Sea. Secretary of State John Kerry did the same in 2014. Meanwhile, Biden's son Hunter and Kerry's stepson Chris Hines carried out massive business deals with Chinese officials and the state-owned Bank of China. Worse, Hunter Biden and Chris Hines even invested in a Chinese nuclear company under FBI investigation. Can you imagine if their name was Trump? This is in a book by Peter Schweizer. He says, during a critical 18-month period of diplomatic negotiations between Washington and Beijing, the Biden and Kerry families and friends pocketed major cash from companies connected to the Chinese government. Schweizer's book delves into the ways in which American princelings profit at home and abroad from the economic and diplomatic policies of high-ranking U.S. officials. With former Vice President Biden rumored to be considering a 2020 presidential run, the scandals surrounding how his diplomatic efforts enriched his son take on renewed importance. His role in abetting China's aggression for family gain seems particularly damning, they write. When Biden became the vice president in 2009, his son Hunter Biden, became a social fixture in Washington. And Schweizer explains this in his book. In the summer of 2009, the vice president's son joined forces with Chris Hines, a wealthy heir to the late Senator John Hines, whose wife Teresa married John Kerry. The two formed Rosemont Capital, an alternative investment firm, quote, positioned to strike profitable deals overseas with foreign governments and officials with whom the U.S. government was negotiating. Devin Archer, Chris Hines' roommate at Yale and star fundraiser for John Kerry's 2004 presidential run, joined the American princelings at Rosemont. Federal agents would later arrest Archer in May 2016 for defrauding a Native American tribe in an effort to enrich a branch of Rosemont Capital called Rosemont Seneca Bohai. Now, these American princelings set up Rosemont Capital as this alternative investment fund of the Hines family office and attached several branches to it. When Vice President Biden went to China in December 2013 amid the South China Sea aggression, his son Hunter went with him. Hunter Biden was negotiating a major deal between Rosemont Seneca and the state-owned Bank of China. As the vice president discussed China's trade with the United States, his son was putting these economic ties into practice. And the U.S. effectively caved in the conflict over the South China Sea. 10 days after the Bidens visited China, the Bank of China, which is embedded in a complex network involving state ministries, security forces, and the Communist Party, and which provides capital for China's economic statecraft, created an investment fund with Rosemont Seneca called Bohai Harvest RST. In short, the Chinese government was literally funding a business that it co-owned, along with the sons of two of America's most powerful decision-makers. Rosemont Seneca received a benefit no other Western firm had in China, as Schweizer writes. A private equity cross-border investment fund formed in the Chinese government's Shanghai Free Trade Zone. With this privilege, Rosemont Seneca could take Chinese government funds and invest them in China or outside the country, or even in the U.S. As the vice president caved on the South China Sea And as his son benefited from this lucrative deal, China ramped up its aggression, forming islands and transforming these artificial islands into military bases with airfields, runways, ports, aircraft systems. In July 2014, Secretary of State John Kerry visited China. While the Chinese government had disliked Hillary Clinton's unipolar voice, they found Kerry a much more willing ally. When President Xi Jinping called for a commitment to boost Sino-U.S. economic ties, Kerry echoed the call. China and the U.S. represent the greatest economic alliance trading partnership in the history of humankind, said John Kerry. Meanwhile, a former subsidiary of the Chinese government, Gemini Investments, aimed to purchase Rosemont Realty, another branch of the Rosemont Capital Tree run by Hunter Biden, Chris Hines, and this fella Devin Archer. Rosemont Realty had put the mayor of Santa Fe on the bankroll and purchased New Mexico's largest commercial real estate company, BJK. After acquiring trophy buildings, the company prepared to be purchased by the Chinese company, that is, Gemini Investments. Gemini Investments is considered an indirect subsidy of the Chinese government. It's operated by its parent company. And it goes on. The Chinese, well, you get the drift. Hunter Biden and Chris Hines made a fortune off of special deals and privileges from the Chinese government, financial relations with the Chinese government, and the implication here is quite serious. That Joe Biden and John Kerry basically looked the other way as China was incredibly aggressive. I'll be back. Now, this was in the New York Post. You think it's just the Democrats? Mitch McConnell. Again, this is in the Peter Schweizer book, and we'll have Peter here for some time on Friday. He says, in 2004, current Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and his wife, current U.S. Transportation Secretary Elaine Chao, this is written by Larry Getlin, referring to his book, Schweizer's book, had an average net worth of $3.1 million. Okay, that's 13, 14 years ago. But 10 years later, in 2014, that number had increased to somewhere between $9.2 million and $36.5 million. So they went from 3.1 to between 9.2 and 36.5. How did they do that? One source of the windfall, according to a new book from Schweizer, was a 2008 gift from Chao's father, James Chao, for somewhere between $5 and $25 million. But this gift could be seen as more than just a gift. It may have been acquired, according to Schweizer, thanks to the couple's fealty to China, the source of the Chao family fortune. And that fealty may have occurred at the expense of the nation they had pledged to serve. Secret Empires, this new book, details myriad examples of corruption from members of both political parties. Rather than focusing on direct forms of corruption, such as bribes, Schweizer hones in on more indirect graft of the modern era. Rather than risk their careers taking bribes for potential minuscule rewards, Schweizer points out how today's politicians are savvier, engaging in what he calls corruption by proxy. While politicians and their spouses are often subject to rigid regulations on what gifts they can accept and what sort of businesses they can conduct, others around them, like their friends or children, have no obstacles. And you just saw that with Biden and Kerry. So while a politician can theoretically wind up in prison for accepting $10,000 for doling out favors, establishing overseas connections that could land your children multi-million-dollar deals is harder to detect and often legal. Foreign governments and oligarchs like this form of corruption because it gives them private and unfettered gateways to the corridors of Washington power, Schweizer writes. Foreign entities cannot legally make campaign contributions, so using this approach creates an alternative way to curry favor and influence America's political leaders. Simply camouflaging these transactions as business agreements provides another shield of plausible deniability. Now, as Schweizer tells it in his book, Elaine Chao, the Chao family, remember she's married to McConnell. The Chao family fortune derives from the foremost group. Notice they set up all these institutions. The foremost group, a shipping company that Chinese native James Chow, her father, and a classmate of former Chinese President Jiang Zemin at Jiaotong University, founded in New York in 1964. So he founds this Foremost group in New York in 1964. Chow remains Foremost's chairman today, and his daughters Angela and Christine are the company's deputy chairwoman and general counsel, respectively. Elaine Chow worked there in the 1970s and has been quoted as saying, "Shipping is our family tradition." Now, the success of Foremost, this company, is largely due to its close ties to the Chinese government, in particular the China State Shipbuilding Corporation, a corporation with which Foremost has done large volumes of business. Now, this company, the Chinese State Shipping Corporation, this state-run company by the Chinese government, or the CSSC, Schweizer writes, is a state-owned defense conglomerate at the heart of the Chinese government's military-industrial complex. The main goal of this Chinese company is to strengthen the Chinese military. Now, James and Angela Chow have both sat on the board of a CSSC, this Chinese government company, off of a offshoot of that company. They've sat on the board. While Foremost, the Chow company, is an American company, their ships have been constructed by Chinese government shipyards, and some of their construction financed by the Chinese government, he writes. He says, in addition, their crews are largely Chinese, despite U.S. Transportation Secretary and company founders Elaine Chow having once said that ships crewed by Americans are a vital part of our national security. Given all this, it's worth noting how both Mitch McConnell and Elaine Chow, in their roles as high-ranking U.S. officials, have personally interacted with and then gone considerably soft on China since their 1993 wedding. When Senator McConnell, who took hardline positions against China prior to his marriage, met with high-ranking Chinese officials in 1994, it was not in his capacity as a senator, but via a personal invitation from the CSSC Chinese company arranged by James Chow, Elaine's father. McConnell met with Zemin, then the country's president, and Vice Premier Li Langqing. After this meeting, McConnell, quote, would increasingly avoid public criticism of China, unquote, and more meetings like it would follow in the years to come. Schweizer writes, as the Chows and the Chinese government went into business together, the Chows McConnells tied their economic fate to the good fortunes of Beijing. Were McConnell to critique Beijing aggressively or support policies damaging to Chinese interests, Beijing would severely damage the family's economic fortunes. In the ensuing years, is this boring, everybody? Is this boring you, Mr. Producer? I think it's stunning, absolutely shocking and disgusting. In the ensuing years, McConnell has loudly defended China in the actions against Hong Kong and Taiwan, even claiming that the United States needed to be ambiguous as to whether we would come to the defense of Taiwan if attacked by China. When the late Senator Jesse Helms introduced the Taiwan Security Enhancement Act, pledging support for Taiwanese independence in 1999, it had 21 co-sponsors and heavy Republican support, but McConnell was not on the list. When Congress required China to document annual progress on human rights in order to maintain its trade status in the aftermath of the Tiananmen Square massacre, ditching the requirements became a priority for the country. In 2000, McConnell co-sponsored S-2277, which would do just that. McConnell also fought attempts to punish China for vigorously undervaluing its currency, a tactic that led the Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid to invoke the nuclear option, changing Senate rules on voting. The bill passed 63-35 with McConnell voting against. Now, Elaine Chow has also done her part to support her ancestral home. When she served as Secretary of Labor under George W. Bush, her department resisted efforts to, quote, call out the Chinese government over its workers' rights practices, as Schweizer writes. When a petition was filed against China on the subject of workers' rights, based on the U.S. Trade Act of 1974, Chow opposed it. After a bipartisan congressional report citing Chinese espionage against the U.S. circulated in 2000, Chow, Schweizer writes, was critical of the report, making clear she in no way agreed with its findings, and Schweizer writes, dismissing the idea that China could pose any threat to the United States. So this dishonest double-dealing works on both sides of the political aisle. And it goes on into other individuals and other matters as well. The Bidens, the Kerrys, McConnells, the Chows. All this going on in the shadows. All this going on behind our backs. These are supposed to be public officials. They and their families are getting filthy rich. And America is getting weaker and poorer as a result. And they dared to stand there and attack this president and his family? Collusion? Well, it looks like Biden's son and Kerry's stepson were colluding with the Chinese. Collusion? Somebody should ask Mitch McConnell and Elaine Chao about collusion. And then I see this today, ladies and gentlemen, from CNBC. China and Russia are aggressively pursuing hypersonic weapons, and the U.S. can't defend against them, top nuclear commander says. Now, we're going to talk about this briefly. But when you have all these activities going on, people are self-dealing, and yet they do it in a way where they can deny it. This kills a republic. This is the Senate Majority Leader. This is the Secretary of Transportation. This is the former Vice President of the United States who wants to be President of the United States. Former Secretary of State who wanted to be President of the United States. Is this what they mean by carrying out an effective foreign policy? It really makes you wonder how China could continue to build and build and build up its military with almost no pushback for the last 10 years. There's not going to be a special counsel to investigate these people. But the injustice of it, and even more, its destructive nature to this country, is unconscionable, absolutely unconscionable. Mitch McConnell should be removed for all the reasons I've said before, but especially now, as Senate Majority Leader, and there ought to be an ethics investigation looking into his background. And I am damn serious about it. It's a pleasure to have Peter Schweizer on the program and his great book, Secret Empires, How the American Political Class Hides Corruption and Enriches Family and Friends. It's a great book, Peter. Congratulations. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much, Mark. It's great to be on with you.
Well, it's a pleasure, and now you get to talk to a real audience. No offense to all the rest of them. I'm just
You've got the smartest audience out there. That's always been my experience.
Thank you, sir. I want to dig right in on this, and I quoted from your book somewhat earlier in the week. Mitch McConnell and Elaine Chao.
Yeah.
Tell us what you write about them.
Well, basically, you look, the Chinese government has a strategy. They want to co-opt political elites. They've tried to do it in Canada. They've tried to do it in Australia, and they do it in the United States. And the way they do it with McConnell and Chao is that they have greased the family into very lucrative commercial deals in China. And Mitch McConnell's a beneficiary of that because he gets gifts from his father-in-law, James Chao, to the tune of between $5 and $25 million. And, Mark, these relationships, these are not just, they happen to do business in China. The Chao family is in the shipping business, and if you read the trade publications of the shipping industry, it is an open secret in that small world that they enjoy, in the words of those publications, very close relationships with the Chinese government.
This is Mitch McConnell's wife's family. Go ahead.
That's correct. Foremost Maritime, Foremost Group is the name of the entity. So the Chinese government builds all their ships It finances the construction of those ships. It provides the crews for those ships, and it provides a lot of the cargo that they haul around the world. These are Chinese state-owned entities which give them the business. If that weren't bad enough, you also have this sort of rather bizarre situation, Mark, where the Senate Majority Leader and a cabinet officer of the United States, the father-in-law, James Chao, and the sister, Angela Chao, have actually served on the board of the China State Shipbuilding Corporation Holdings, which is an offshoot of the largest military contractor in China. Also, you have Angela Chao.
These are Mitch McConnell's in-laws.
That's correct, Mitch McConnell's in-laws. And CSSC Holdings, which is the company where they served on the board, have been identified by the U.S. Naval Academy as the means to finance military construction in China. So this is the heart of the Chinese military-industrial complex. And you also have the fact that after Donald Trump was elected president in November 2016, China was, concerned about statements he'd made about standing up to them in the South China Sea on some of his policies on trade and technology transfer. So a week after he was elected, the Bank of China, which is the fourth largest bank in the world, it's run by the Chinese government, put Elaine Chao's sister, Angela Chao, on the board of directors, the first foreign national to sit on that board. So they are...
So, hold on now. So Mitch McConnell's sister-in-law serves on the board of directors of the largest Chinese, which is state-run bank?
Yes, on the Bank of China, which is identified as one of the economic tools that the Chinese government uses to, expand its interests overseas. It's very clear the McConnell-Chao financial future is directly tied to the Chinese government. And were Mitch McConnell to do something in the Senate to upset the Chinese, they could wreak havoc on their family business tomorrow. And that's exactly the way the Chinese want it.
Okay, now let me ask you this. As you write in your book, are there indications that Mitch McConnell, in certain cases, as a consequence or a likely consequence, gone soft on China?
Yes, I chart this. The relationship begins in 1993, Mark, where Mitch McConnell up until this point has been very hawkish on China. He probably gave the toughest speech on the Tiananmen Square massacre of anybody in the U.S. Senate. 4 years later, he's married to Elaine Chao. He visits Beijing, only the second U.S. senator to do so since the massacre, with his father-in-law, James Chao. And they're not there as part of a U.S. congressional delegation. The Chinese press is very clear. They are there as guests of the China State Shipbuilding Corporation. And what you see is two things happening in parallel, beginning in 1993 and up to the present, Mark. One is this commercial relationship that I've been laying out. At the same time, you see Mitch McConnell increasingly soft on China. He becomes apologetic about the handover of Hong Kong to China. He becomes less critical of their military actions. He says that he opposes legislation related to currency manipulation as it relates to China because he's a free trader. Now, I'm a free trader as well, but here's the problem. When it comes to Japan, when it comes to other countries, Burma and South America and Europe, he's not consistently free trade. It's only on China that he takes out a position of saying we don't want to deal with issues related to currency manipulation.
And I'll tell you, Peter, what's interesting. I'm a free trader, but when it comes to China, I'm less so a free trader.
Right.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
Because they're building their military against us, because they're stealing our technology.
You're exactly right. I mean, they are state actors, and that's what makes these relationships so troubling. I mean, the Naval Academy says that by 2030, they expect the Chinese Navy to surpass the U.S. Navy if current trends continue. And yet you've got the Senate Majority Leader and his family that have these close ties to big military contractors in Beijing. I mean, there's just no way around it. And, what Mitch McConnell will say is that has nothing, that's not going to influence his decision-making at all. But, I tell you, Mark, if we worry about, political contributions swaying a politician, or we worry about a politician, owning stock in an oil company.
Or a politician going to lunch and somebody paying for his lunch, for crying out loud?
Exactly. I mean, these kinds of ties are going to have huge effects on the way they see things. And Mitch McConnell knows that the financial fate of his family is tied to the good graces and being in the good graces of Beijing.
This is absolutely appalling. Absolutely appalling. Now, Peter Schweizer, when we come back, if that wasn't bad enough, I want you to tell us about the children of Joe Biden and John Kerry. That is, Joe Biden's son and John Kerry's stepson and their relationships, business relationships with China. Excellent book. It really is. Secret Empires. Please check it out. We have a link to it. You can get it at Amazon.com. We'll be right back with Peter Schweizer. Now we're here with Peter Schweizer, his terrific new book, Secret Empires, How the American Political Class Hides Corruption and Enriches Family and Friends. I want to strongly encourage you to get it. You can go to Amazon, any major bookstore, or if you're on my Mark Levin Show Facebook or Mark Levin Show Twitter, we'll make it convenient right there, or on my radio website, marklevinshow.com. We're everywhere. Now, Peter Schweizer, the McConnell-Chow connection, husband-wife, is absolutely breathtaking in the relationship with official Chinese government. But so, too, is the relationship between Joe Biden's son and the Chinese government and John Kerry's stepson. Can you fill us in on that?
Yeah, I mean it's pretty clear cut. Between 2013 and 2016, while John Kerry is Secretary of State and Joe Biden as Vice President are negotiating with the Chinese, their sons and a close Kerry aide are closing lucrative commercial deals with the Chinese government. And it gets kicked off, Mark, in December of 2013 when Joe Biden flies on Air Force 2 to Beijing. He's there to talk about a lot of issues, the South China Sea, trade, economic issues, etc. Well, with him on Air Force 2 is his son, Hunter Biden. And after that trip, Joe Biden is criticized in the Asian press for basically being soft on Beijing. He doesn't really challenge them on anything. 10 days after they come back from that trip, Hunter Biden, who has a small firm called Rosemont Seneca, scores a $1 billion deal, that's with a B, a $1 billion deal with the Chinese government, a private equity deal, and this involves him, and it involves the Rosemont entity, and Rosemont, the name Rosemont is the name of the Kerry, Teresa Heinz Kerry, and John Kerry estate in Pennsylvania. And they basically invest money for the Chinese government. There are two other deals. The other one is something called a Rosemont.
All right, let me slow you.
Sure.
So, $1 billion deal involving Joe Biden's son in this hedge fund called Rosemont.
Right.
And what exactly is Hunter Biden's background in hedge funds?
It's zero. When his father was picked to be Barack Obama's running mate in 2008, he was a lobbyist, and he was doing lobbying work for the casino industry. So he has no background in private equity whatsoever.
And the Chinese cough up $1 billion to invest in his firm?
That's right. In fact, they later, 6 months later, expanded to $1.5 billion. And this is, again, all going on while his father is a point person on policy towards China.
And his father's going soft on China, too, just like McConnell.
Yes, that's exactly right. And I quote in the book, I lay it out, Japan, the Philippines, all these allies are critical because at this time, December 2013, Mark, it's when China has made their territorial claim in the South China Sea. And everybody is concerned about this flexing of muscles. Joe Biden goes to Beijing and rolls over for them. And everybody's kind of mystified. I think one of the reasons he rolls over is what happens 10 days after they return when his son, with no background in private equity, scores this $1 billion deal from the Chinese government. This is important. This is not an American company doing business in China. This is not a, Chinese company that's kind of run. This is the Chinese government itself giving $1 billion to this Rosemont Seneca entity that he has set up, and that includes Devin Archer, who's a longtime Kerry aide, who was co-finance chairman of his 2004 campaign, and you've got Chris Hines, the stepson, who's also involved. You've got these two other deals with the Chinese government that follow, all at the time that John Kerry and Joe Biden are negotiating with the Chinese government.
John Kerry's stepson, what's his role?
Well, his role is really as an investor. He puts up half the money for Rosemont Seneca Partners, which is kind of the vehicle that gets this going. But he's also involved in the third deal that occurs. It's called Rosemont Realty. This is a real estate firm that he has invested in. Again, Rosemont is the name of the Kerry Hines estate. And the Chinese come in and buy 75% of the company. And what's interesting about this transaction, Mark, is Rosemont Realty becomes Gemini Rosemont Realty. People can look it up online. What's interesting about Gemini, Mark, is this is a company that is linked to Costco, which is this large Chinese conglomerate you might recall in the 90s, was involved in all this military activity, and is regarded as the fifth arm of the Chinese Navy. So it's not only a Chinese government entity, it's linked to the Chinese military, and they buy part of Rosemont Realty where Chris Hines is an owner.
So I assume these young men are very, very wealthy right now.
I think they are. I think that, look, these deals are lucrative. Part of the problem is we don't know exactly how much money they've made. This is how crazy this is, and this is why I called the book Secret Empires, Mark. Think about Joe Biden for a second. If he gets a $1,000 campaign contribution, he has to disclose that. If he has $1,000 in General Electric stock, he has to disclose that. If his son gets a $1 billion deal from a foreign government, the Chinese government, no disclosure requirements. That's why these secret empires are so troubling, and they have to be dealt with.
Now, in addition to their sons, you said there was a campaign co-chairman of the John Kerry for President campaign. What happened to him?
Well, his name is Devin Archer, and he actually got arrested in 2016 on another scheme that I talk about in the book that Hunter Biden very well could be involved in. This was a scheme, believe it or not, Mark, to bilk the poorest Indian tribe in America, the Oglala Sioux of South Dakota, in a fraudulent bond deal, a $60 million bond deal. He was arrested in 2016, and he's going to be going on trial in about 8 weeks on those charges. So Mr. Archer has got big problems beyond just doing these deals with China.
Is this something for the Ethics Committee to investigate, or this is the sort of thing they do investigate, or where do we go from here?
Well, I will say, and I think probably you'll be hearing more about this in a week or so, I've had people from Capitol Hill reach out that are interested in having the House Oversight Committee look into this. I think it has to be looked into, and this is the trend of the future, Mark. I mean, we can forget about, Congressman who had the $90,000 cash in his freezer. $90,000 is chump change. These are large, massive deals involving foreign governments, and unless we get a handle of this, it is completely undermining the decision-making we have in this country because, look, they are by nature, with these commercial ties with the Chinese government, going to be softer on China. There's no way that it cannot influence their decision-making process.
And China is a huge problem. I mean, China is stealing our technology left and right. It's forcing companies, American companies in China, to cough up their technology with these phony partnerships with state-run Chinese companies. They're also stealing our technology through cyber warfare and on-the-ground spies and so forth. We can't treat China as just a trading partner, and we can't allow these politicians with these lucrative links through family members to China to get away with it, quite frankly. And here we have the Republican leader in the United States Senate, based on your reporting.
Yep.
He and his in-laws, and through his in-laws, him, of course he's going to be looking over his shoulder when he's making decisions about the United States' position on China. How can he not be?
That's exactly right, Mark. And this effort that China has put forward, they are the ascendant power and rival. Russia I get why people, focus on Putin, and Putin is not a good guy. But Russia is a declining power. China is the ascendant power. And it's amazing to me when we look at sort of the press coverage. And look, I said at the beginning that they ought to look at this whole issue of Russia collusion, when it first came out. But there's nothing there. And what's mystifying to me is they're looking at non-existent deals that never occurred, while you actually have billion-dollar deals involving a foreign government, the Chinese, and the family members of senior elected officials in Washington, D.C. And it seems to me that we ought to be looking at this stuff because it is very clearly undermining our sovereignty. And let me just give you this one illustration, by the way. The money that Hunter Biden's firm got to invest, one of the investments they made, and I write about this in the book, is in a company called CGN, China General Nuclear. And they become an anchor investor in that company. Less than a year after the vice president's son's firm invests in CGN, senior CGN officials are arrested by the Obama FBI for stealing nuclear secrets. That's how bad it's become, and what they're willing to do to make a buck. They're willing to align themselves with these kinds of companies that are doing exactly what you're talking about, which is stealing our secrets and trying to gain a technological edge over the United States.
I only have a minute or two, but let me ask you this. Have the intrepid reporters at CNN or NBC or ABC or CBS or MSNBC taken your baton where you've laid this out? Have any of them actually started running with it?
They have not, Mark. And, this is a huge problem. When I wrote Clinton Cash for a year and a half, I was basically on one show on CNN. Then when Donald Trump was elected in January of 2017, I came out and said he needs to create a big ethical wall between his investments and his jobs as president to make sure that there's no corrupting influences. When I made that announcement, they had me on one show with Clinton Cash in a year and a half. 5 CNN shows reached out and said, will you come on and talk about Trump's ethics? Mm-hmm. That's the kind of thing that we're seeing. Ethics should not be a partisan issue.
Listen, Peter, I got to go. Hard break. Outstanding job. I know how hard you had to work on a book like this, and I want to congratulate you. And God bless you. Thank you for doing this. And I want to strongly encourage you folks to get this book over the weekend. It's called Secret Empires. You can get it on Amazon.com and so forth. So I really wish you would take a look at it. I'll be right back.